you were around and active for the first Earth Day in 1970? Oh, great. Some of you weren't even born yet. Anyway, I was in high school and I was very much inspired by Earth Day. I think I was born an environmentalist without knowing what that was for a long time. And I imagine many of you could fit that category as well. I was just taking a look at a little bit of the history of Earth Day and wanted to ask, who knows where it how it started? Anybody want to take a guess? George.
It started with Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin, who basically promulgated it and proclaimed it.
Right. And he had some help and some support back in the 60s. He was talking about it with Attorney General Robert Kennedy and Arthur Schlesinger, who was a member of President Kennedy's best and brightest cabinet. How many people do you think were involved, at least according to the estimates, during the first Earth Day? Louise.
I don't know.
You got it. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it was about 20 million.
You're right. You get a gold star. And why was it picked to be celebrated on April 22nd? Any ideas?
It was his birthday.
Who said that? What?
That it was his birthday. He picked his own birthday.
Who said that? Becky? It was Gaylord's birthday?
I just heard it, but maybe it was somebody else's
Could
birthday.
have been, could have been. So it said it was specifically selected to mobilize college students. And it may have also been his birthday. So there you go.
Story I heard that was that, yes, they wanted to wait for like the weather to be better, but
Yeah.
before school got out, but that also it was the birthday.
Okay, there you go. And
Can I add to that I'm not sure exactly on what date the Kent State Massacre was.
the Kent State Massacre, does anybody remember the date of that?
Same time, in sort of April through May of 1970.
70. We can look that up, Myrtle. There was someone who Dennis Hayes picked to head up the organizing effort. Anybody know the name of that person? Oh, that was Dennis Hayes, who was a graduate student then at Harvard University. And what Earth Day did back then was to really inspire and spark an unprecedented amount of environmental legislation. So it's interesting because we're looking at how much we still have to do and how much legislation we're trying to push for these 51 years later. And after all the years that we've talked about the importance of acknowledging what human beings have done to Earth and what we have to do to fix all of the broken things and reverse our carbon emissions, that we're still quite far away from achieving some of those goals. But we are so much closer now because of the situation that we're in legislatively, because we have the likes of President Biden and his climate plan and the people that he has picked to be in his cabinet and all the wonderful people like you guys who are working on the front lines in your communities and writing great letters to your congresspeople. And we only have this intense short window really to do this work before the 2022 midterms, and particularly now between now and September, when this legislation, this great American Jobs Plan, needs to get passed or become legislation. So I want to mention a couple of things about Shomrei Adamah, and I'm going to show you the logo that I'm going to hold it up here and make sure you can see it.
Yeah, lift it up. There you go.
Okay, so this is the original. 1990, when I learned about the beginning of the Shomrei Adamah, the Keepers of the Earth, that was being promoted by the founder, Ellen Bernstein, who now is a rabbi. But at the time, the story that I recall is that, whoops, sorry about that. Ellen was on a camping hiking trip in the Grand Canyon with some friends, and it happened to be Pesach. And although she wasn't a particularly observant Jew, she realized that she needed to acknowledge this special festival. And so she created a Seder right there with her friends in the wilds of the Grand Canyon. And that was her aha moment. And out of that, she initiated this effort, started talking about it. And the summer of 1989, she was present and spoke at a kala, a big gathering. I don't know how big, but anyway, at the time it was at Bryn Mawr in Pennsylvania. And it happened to be that my new rabbi at the time, Warren Stone, a Reform rabbi who had joined our congregation in Maryland just the previous fall. And this couple, Mike Tabor and Esther Siegel, who live in Tacoma Park, who were present at that gathering. And about 2 months or 3 months after that meeting in Bryn Mawr, I was invited to my rabbi's study, along with about 1 million of other members of my synagogue. Because he was a new rabbi, he wanted to find out what kind of social justice issues our congregation was interested in and committed to working on. And so he went around the table and asked each person to name their issues. And I was the last one to speak. And I said, well, I haven't seen anything in the Jewish world that has to do with environmental activism, and it's high time we do something. I'm seeing Christian groups doing things. And he said, I went to a gathering this summer and I met this woman named Ellen Bernstein from Philadelphia, and she's starting this group called Shomrei Adamah. And I didn't understand what he was saying. I didn't know what the words meant, but at any rate, he said, she wants to do this work and she's encouraging people around the country to start up groups in their own communities. And there's somebody here locally in the DC area who was present, and he wants to do something. You ought to call him. And I said, okay, what's his name? And he said, Mike Tabor. And I started laughing. And he said, well, why are you laughing? I said, because he's my next door neighbor. And we had just moved into our house, within the year, and we didn't really know our neighbors very much. But just a few months before this, our tree from the side of our driveway fell on their house. And that's how our families got connected. And we're still both living side by side, and we're like extended family these 30-something years later.
That's a natural event, isn't it?
It was what?
That's a natural event.
Yeah, well, I look back on it and I say, God works in mysterious ways and was trying to send us a message, and we got it. So
That's
Michael and I became the co-founders of Shomrei Adamah, the Washington area. We had our very first presence on the National Mall for Earth Day, the 20th anniversary of Earth Day in 1990.
Great.
Which I sat down one day and crafted this logo. We had t-shirts made. I should be wearing my t-shirt right now, but I'm not. And
well, thank you so much, Dee.
I'm done with my little inspiration, but I had to tell that story because it's
great.
It's his story.
It's good to get some history. It's got institutional history. And as I get to this age, I just celebrated a big birthday. I realize it takes 30, 40, and 50 years sometimes to get things going. And that's why we have to persist. And this week of the Omer is the quality of Netzach, which is a marathon, that it's not a sprint. We have to have endurance. to keep on keeping on, to keep on going. So thank you very much, Dee, for that institutional history and the story of those two watershed moments. So I want to maximize our short time tonight for questions on our legislative briefing about the our action alert and the jobs plan. So a lot of times we go around and introduce ourselves, but I'd really like it if you're able to put your name and where you're from and your group, if you're in a group, to put it in the chat. So we have a record of everybody that's here and everybody can read it if they like. And I see some, I definitely see some new names. I want to welcome a couple of colleagues, Nina Carden from Baltimore and Mike Cummins, a colleague from out west in the mountains, obviously, and from his picture. Any other rabbinic representation on the call that I don't see? Did I miss anybody? And for anybody, is this your first time at our meeting? Bonnie Newman, that's great. Where are you from, Bonnie?
I'm currently living in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, terrific. Terrific. And anybody else on the first page? Let's see. Did I miss anybody on the first page who's new? Well, Ziv Stern is a student. Where are you a student, Ziv?
I just graduated college at Swarthmore College.
From where?
I was just graduated Swarthmore College.
Swarthmore. And Ziv is helping us with your letters. So we're very excited about his joining the group to help us out with the coordination of that. It's quite it's an involved process, and the more, of course, the more people who join, the more involved it gets. So thank you very much for Ziv for joining us. So yeah, it looks like people have put their names in the chat, and that's great. Welcome to everyone. It's a very exciting week for climate advocacy. Oh, is somebody here from Tikkun Hayam by any chance? No. Tikkun Hayam is a new group that has a new partner that's joined us from Florida. After my own heart, they started a group at 6 colleges called Scooby Jew, and they're scuba divers. And my husband and I were president and secretary of the University of Maryland Scuba Diving Club, so long ago. But it's a very exciting week for climate advocacy, the week of Earth Day, and there's so much going on. There is the JCAN Jewish Climate Action Network of Massachusetts conference going on Sunday. And actually, my husband and I are giving a talk, a pre-conference talk tomorrow night at 7:30 called Mixed Marriage, Science and the Spirituality of Climate Change. And there is also something going on. Oh, Nina Carden is speaking at Adat Shalom. Is that right, Mirala? Yes, tomorrow night as well. So all from 12 to 8 is the JCAN Massachusetts conference, but it's a national conference. De Herman, you're going to be teaching Drawdown there, yes, right? Oh no, sorry. What is it that you're going to be?
Teaching the work that reconnects, Joanna Macy's work.
Yes, the work that reconnects. So every day it seems there's promising news from the Biden White House and some encouraging movement in Congress. So it's such a breath of fresh air from last year. But time is of the essence, and we can't let down our guard on this. We need to persevere, netzach, keep going, keep up our resilience. And I heard somebody say the other day, sleep is overrated, but I don't want to, I'm not going to say that. Sleep is not overrated. You need at least 7 hours of sleep, and then you'll feel better and more energetic, and you can get the work done in a more efficient way. So take breaks, sleep well, get outside. God wants us to enjoy God's creation as well as to repair it. Ed Koff from our steering committee, did you want to say a few words about, give us a bit of a briefing?
Yeah, just for a moment, I want to bring those of you who are involved in sending letters to your representatives and senators, and I know most, if not all of you are. We've begun discussing ways in which we can change our process for doing that. The most important change we've made is Zeev has come in and is now taking us into the 21st century in the way we process. But we're talking to individual groups and hearing that different groups want different things. Some would like JEA to continue processing their letters centrally. Some are interested in doing things more independently. Some are interested in having their names on their cover letters, etc. So we'll continue working on that, talking to folks. And I think where we'll wind up again is offering a set of options to each group to make sure that each is getting the kind of help and the kind of independence they want. One other thing I'll mention is that where we have multiple groups in a single state, we're increasingly moving towards trying to coalesce those groups in some sense so that we can send letters to the senators for that state from all the groups in that state, while the individual groups continue addressing their local representatives. So we'll keep you up to date as this all evolves, but I wanted you to know that we're thinking about improving things and we're working at it.
Thank you so much, Ed. That really lays out that we're always thinking of more efficient ways to do what we're doing, and also more ways that you can be more intimate, having more of a close relationship with your representatives in Congress as well. So this evening, we welcome Dahlia Rockowitz, the new Washington Director for Dayenu, the Jewish Call to Climate Action. She's a graduate of Northwestern University and completed graduate work at Michigan University in environmental resources, planning, policy, and justice. She has previously worked at the Climate Reality Project and at the American Jewish World Service. Dahlia is an experienced advocate, a creative strategist, an organizer, and educator fighting for climate and social and racial justice. And she will share her wisdom tonight on the exciting American jobs and climate plan generated out of the White House. So thank you so much, Dahlia, for making the time this busy week to come and speak with us.
Sure. Thank you for that welcome. And I will say, in hearing my own bio read back to me, I am also aware of how much expertise there is on this call. And so that is a little of my background, but I know that others have a lot to share and to contribute. So today I'll be sharing a little more about my work at Dayenu and around this American Jobs Plan and what it means for a just green recovery. I am going to be sharing my screen in just a moment. And so while I'm working on that piece, I am curious to hear of those who are on the call, how much you've heard about the American Jobs Plan. And this is not a judgment about whether you read in close detail the May action alert from the Jewish Earth Alliance. But if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat if you've heard a lot, a little, just to get a sense of where people are. And again, a little is great, a lot is great. So please let me know, and I will do my best to check the chat throughout my presentation. But if I miss something, please free to hop in a little later. Okay, so we've got so far a little and a medium, so that's helpful. I will sort of do a choose your own adventure, and for those who want some additional details, I'm going to pause partially the way through the presentation to answer any questions. And if there are additional questions, I'm happy to answer those once we've wrapped the agenda for tonight. So a little to a medium, I like that measurement. Great. So it sounds like everyone's come to the right place because you've heard a little. I know it's been sort of in the zeitgeist in the news, and tonight we'll sort of do a deeper dive. But what I want to sort of start with is that all of this work falls under Dayenu's work for a just green recovery. And I just, I put the link to information about the campaign in the chat so that some of what I'm sharing tonight is taken from that website. So it's always a good place to reference if you want some additional information. So the genesis of the Just Green Recovery and frankly for the American Jobs Plan, which is part of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda, is a recognition of what we've come through in the past year. The COVID crisis, the economic downturn, the realization that we're really falling short in terms of helping working families and working parents, that we're falling short in terms of our healthcare system, and that we're really falling short on racial justice. And so as we emerge from this moment of emergency and relief, and as we turn to recovery, we need to be thinking about how we can build back in a different way. And that is where President Biden came back with his Build Back Better. Some of our allies also use Build Back Bolder, which I like as well. And for us, the sort of central organizing principle, let's see if I can, there we go, of Just Green Recovery comes down to sort of three main pillars: clean energy or climate action, good jobs, economic justice, and justice overall, though I think there's a big emphasis on racial justice as well. And so for clean energy, as it relates to this opportunity for federal action, what we really need from our federal government now is big investment in clean energy and transportation, the infrastructure and technology that we need to transition to a clean energy future. And for the first time in years, there's a real appetite, there's an understanding that that is an important role of the federal government, and there is a willingness to sort of put their money where their mouth is. So looking for that clean energy investment and also the standards and the benchmarks we need to say, okay, we're going to phase out fossil fuels and we're going to really phase in these renewable energy sources. So making sure that as we're working on transforming our economy, building back our economy, revisiting what our society needs to thrive, that we're infusing in that with climate action and clean energy. A big piece of that is around jobs. Who is actually going to build this clean energy future? And we want to make sure that the jobs we're creating are good jobs, that they're family sustaining jobs with benefits, with the opportunity to form unions and bargain collectively if that's what the workers choose. And that we acknowledge that as we transition our economy, that there will be some jobs that will be displaced, and we want to find work with dignity for those communities. At the same time, maybe there have been others who've been excluded in the past, and how can we make sure there's opportunities for them to join or remain in the workforce? And the last piece is around environmental justice, and that's ensuring that everyone can share in the benefits of this clean energy future and is not facing disproportionate burdens, either from fossil fuels and the emissions that they cause. I think COVID has really taught us a lot more about air pollution and what that means for your health and your lifespan, but also in terms of your economic well-being, your livelihoods, and again, making sure that these investments are put into communities that need them the most and that they have a say in how these decisions are made. So with that in mind, I want to talk a little more about the American Jobs Plan and sort of how it fits into this this criteria. And I'm actually going to, rather than go through the plan in detail, because there are a lot of great infographics and articles out there, I sort of wanted to spotlight some of the proposals and how they meet this criteria of clean energy, jobs, and justice, sort of how we're going to move to this moment of climate action in a way that will that aligns with our values and can have the tangible results we want to see. So there's been a big focus in the American Jobs Plan around electric vehicles, building more infrastructure to charge those vehicles and creating incentives for people to trade in their cars to purchase an electric vehicle. Transportation emissions are the #1 cause of emissions in the United States. This is a big area when it comes to climate action. And what we're seeing here with this focus on electric vehicles, on clean cars, is trying to get some of the polluting cars off the road. We know that communities where that have highways running through them are often communities of color. It's often where we see higher incidence of asthma. So how can we transition to clean transportation, but also try and do so in a way that's accessible, that we're providing incentives or offsets for people to purchase these cars, not expecting you to be at a particular income level to access this new clean energy technology. On a related note, there is large investments in retrofitting buildings and building energy efficient, affordable housing. One thing that we saw in the pandemic is that people were staying home, but our emissions levels were still very high. And that's because the buildings that we live in, the way we've designed our communities, they still eat up a lot of fossil fuels. So how can we work to make our buildings more energy efficient, but do so in a way that housing is more affordable for our communities and we can keep them inclusive to people of different backgrounds and income levels. Another piece that is exciting, looking at what is often referred to as a just transition, fossil fuel workers who might be displaced as we move away from coal or oil, is this proposal to put those workers to work, capping abandoned oil and gas wells. Those are a big source of methane, which is a super polluting greenhouse gas. We often talk about carbon, but methane is particularly bad. And all this to say, and I won't go through all the examples because we are short on time, but there is a lot in this proposal, and I encourage you to explore further, that can make a real difference when it comes to climate and when it comes to good jobs and justice. I will highlight this last piece around in-home and community care, because the American Jobs Plan is actually only half of the proposal that we're expecting from President Biden. He'll be releasing the second half of his Build Back Better plan, called the American Families Plan, at some point in the next few weeks. And that's talking about barriers to work. So Representative Katie Porter had this great quote where she said, it's not just roads and bridges that get you to work, but it's childcare and healthcare. And so looking at what our economy is built on, and making sure that we're really thinking about what's needed in this more just, sustainable future. So that's a little more about the American Jobs Plan. Not to sort of beleaguer the point, but what I think is important to understand is it's a lot of talk of infrastructure and economics and taxes and things like that, but really at its heart is the potential for the largest investment in clean energy, transportation, and electricity in the history of the United States. And so it really it is transformative in so many ways, but it will only be as ambitious as we demand that it becomes. So what's needed to take this proposal and to turn it into law? The first thing to understand is that right now it's just a proposal. President Biden, what he presented was what people have been referring to as in his opening bid, sort of what his vision is. And now it's up to Congress to turn it into actual legislation for consideration. And so there's still a lot up for grabs and there's still a lot of discussion. So we need to make sure that this proposed legislation is fit for purpose, and fight to make sure that it's what science and justice demands. And for us, these sort of three pieces are helpful to sort of figure out how we can sort of articulate what science and justice demands, and how the American Jobs Plan adds up and where we can be and should be calling for more. So one of the pieces is around scope. You may have seen there's a lot of hand wringing about what counts as infrastructure, and there's many ways to define it, and we're thinking of it as this broader understanding around economic recovery, but making sure that we're looking across the economy. The second piece is around standards. Are we making sure that these are good jobs? Are we making sure that these investments are in the right communities? Are we ensuring that there are actual environmental standards? Because nothing is accidental. Everything needs to be done with intention. And so I would say on the scope and the standards, we're pretty pleased with what's been put forward by President Biden. The place where we feel like there's room for improvement is on scale. So President Biden's proposal depends on sort of whose numbers you look at, is somewhere between $2 to $2.75 trillion. And it sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but that's divided out over 8 years. And we know, the scientists tell us, that we have a little under a decade to transform our economy, and that will just not be enough to get us where we're going. The American Rescue Plan was $1.9 trillion, but that was for 1 year. And now we're looking at something that's between 2 and 2 3/4 for 8 years. And we would like to see more. So we work with organizations that support a proposal called the Thrive Agenda. And the Thrive Agenda is a call to make this climate action more ambitious. And what we ask to see is $1 trillion a year of investment over the next decade. So we'd like to see more. That being said, none of this is a given. Again, President Biden's plan is just a proposal. So there's the potential to weaken it or trade away even the things that we like. So we need to make sure that, that this proposal holds on to its climate, its justice, its jobs focus, and we don't trade away some of those good proposals, and we ask for more. But no matter what is in there, what it's going to come down to is public support. And this is really key. And this is the work that you do day in and day out. And we all need to be doing it more often and louder and with new partners and allies. And this means showing that there is a constituency, showing that there are many constituencies that support this approach. And you'll see this picture is polling data from an organization called Data for Progress. And it shows that right now, the wind is in our sails. There's a lot of public support for this proposal. This data was from the first week of April and shows that 73% of people asked support the American Jobs Plan. I will caveat that and say that there's other polling that when the plan is tied to President Biden and Democrats, that number goes down a little to 60%, but that is a lot of support. And so we need to make clear that this is not outrageous. This is not outsized. This is what the moment demands. This is what our future demands. And there's a lot of public support behind this. And so we're going to have to make our voices heard from now until we get this legislation passed. And we'll talk a little about what that looks like next. So what to expect. This is an overwhelming chart, I recognize. There's sort of like the calendar months, then there's the, I just want to know the top line, Dahlia, I don't need all the details. And then there's Dahlia, I would love all the details. So feel free to sort of choose where you fall on the spectrum. But this sort of shows you how we're going to get from this proposal from President Biden to hopefully a piece of legislation sometime between now and like high holidays-ish, right? So top line level work is right now, Congress is taking a look at what President Biden has proposed, and they're deciding what they think and what they want. And I want to acknowledge again that we haven't seen the full proposal. We're still awaiting this American Families Plan, which we're expecting later this month. And then there is a lot of discussion happening at the committee level and also between the two parties. And for committee work, I listed the committees that mostly have jurisdiction, and I will say it's quite complex. And if you want to know more or where your member falls, we can get into that. But these are committees that have jurisdiction over electricity, over transportation, over transit, over housing. So all these components of jobs and infrastructure. What at the very end, the House Ways and Means Committee and Senate Finance Committee, they look at how we raise money to pay for this plan. And that is a whole other argument piece of this equation. So they're also doing work to figure out how to pay for this plan. So right now there's a lot of discussion happening, trying to see what's feasible, trying to see, inviting experts, getting their opinions. And so that's where we're going to see that work continuing on through the next month or so, this committee work. We're also going to see negotiations between Democrats and Republicans. There was just a meeting yesterday in the Oval Office where President Biden invited some Republicans. We'll see that continue as well. So it will take a few more weeks to sort of parse out what the final piece of legislation or what a piece of legislation could look like. And that's part of the process. But what we know is that this is where it's important for us to be weighing in about what we expect to see in this legislation, and for us to figure out who is going to ultimately need more courage, and whether there is the possibility of bipartisan support, because that will determine sort of how this bill moves forward. So April and May are around committee work and consideration. As we move to June and July, that's where we have a more concrete proposal for these chambers to consider. The House and the Senate will each have to vote on their own version of legislation. What you see here presumes that this will not be a bipartisan proposal, or that there'll only be, if the bill gets split, that only part of it will be bipartisan, because it mentions a budget resolution. And this is sort of really getting in the weeds, but if Democrats are unable to secure Republican support, they would move this bill forward under this process called budget reconciliation. So for those who are following along, that work is happening June and July, and may go into August. So once we're into the summer, it's really about looking at the full action on the floor for those full, for the full chambers. And ideally, we've passed legislation by August or even September, so that we can be celebrating come Sukkot, but there's still a lot that's up in the air. So this is sort of again, a different level of what to expect. I did also put recess when Congress is home, because again, public support is going to be key. And when members of Congress are home, they need to be hearing from their constituents, and there's going to be a lot of action around getting them to remain strong, holding them accountable, convincing them to vote the right way when they're in their home districts. So my next piece would be going into the strategy and what we can be doing. But I did want to take questions, but I also know I'm taking a look at the clock. So why don't I keep on going, and then we'll take some questions at the end. And I see some of these questions here, and I will do my best to address them.
Why don't we take one or two questions now, and then okay. So Scott Lewis asked, so Dayenu supports both Jobs Act and Thrive. Can you clarify?
Yeah, so they're not mutually exclusive. The American Jobs Plan is just a proposal, and we say there's a lot of great stuff and we'd love to see more. The Thrive agenda, to some extent, aligns with what President Biden proposes, but calls on him to be doing more, particularly more funding. So we support the ambition of the Thrive agenda. We also celebrate what President Biden has put forward, and we encourage Congress to sort of follow the ambition of the Thrive agenda to potentially propose more. View the Biden proposal as the starting point, not the ending point to trade away, but hopefully sort of think what else they could be doing.
Okay. Do we have, let me take one more question now, and then we'll let Dahlia continue on. Let's see, I have to see people, or you can write it in the chat, I guess. Anybody raising their hand, or unmute yourself? Oh, question from Becky O'Brien. In what ways, if at all, does the Jobs Plan build on or connect to the American Rescue Plan?
Yeah, and I also see, Rebecca, I see your comment, and there's a lot. Rebecca's comment is about environmental justice, and there's a lot in the American Jobs Plan that addresses legacy pollution issues, whether that's lead pipes or PFAS, sometimes known as sort of forever chemicals. So there's a lot of really promising initiatives in this legislation. The American Rescue Plan and the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, the connection you'll probably see is the American plan associated with it. I think the Biden administration sort of sees the American Rescue Plan as initial triage, and the recovery plan is how do we think of long-term thinking. And so I think they're of a whole, but they're different stages in terms of this Build Back Better agenda. I will also say one difference that we can expect between the American Rescue Plan and anything that comes after is there was such a strong sense of urgency and the need for immediate relief that Congress was happy to take what the administration proposed and largely pass it as is. And I think we're going to see a lot more deliberation and conversation around the American Jobs Plan and Families Plan. I think Congress wants to be a lot more involved in that longer term thinking.
Okay, why don't you continue where you were going to head, Dahlia?
Awesome. So the next slide. Ooh,
Dahlia,
there
can
we
you
go.
hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me? I think
Dahlia?
Dahlia, I hear you fine for what that's
okay,
worth.
I think my challenge might be on Devorah's end.
Dahlia?
Devorah, we hear Dahlia.
So the next slide looks similar to the slide before it, but it comes down to strategy.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Devorah, I think you might have a lag because your video is also frozen. Okay. So so if that is what we can expect, what are we actually going to do to win? And so during the committee work and consideration, we need to be talking about the scale and scope of this proposal and encouraging ambition and not trading away, thinking about what the needs are and not necessarily what's feasible. This is a transformative moment, and we need to be calling on our federal government to respond to that. So right now, we're focused on scale and scope. Once we're looking at we have a piece of legislation and there's negotiations happening to try and get passage. The focus is helping members stand strong, trying to get maybe more skeptical members on board and giving them the political cover to support this proposal. And then also encouraging leadership and other members to hold with this proposal and again, not trade away or water down any of the provisions. That's going to be June and July. And then in August, we'll see what happens. We might still be doing that, but maybe we will have already won and we'll be celebrating this ambitious piece of legislation passing into law, or multiple pieces of legislation passing into law. I think the thing that you'll see throughout is this piece in bolds. When Congress is home, they really need to be hearing from us often, especially as they need to stand strong. We need to be showing up at their offices and letting them know that no matter where they go, we're going to remind them that they need to act swiftly, they need to act boldly. And so this is sort of the plan that Dayenu in partnership with allies is going to be implementing. And I encourage you to sign up for updates to find out more and plug in if you want to be a part of this work. But what we can do right now, and I know time is short, is make calls. And so this is a call tool, and I'll put the link in the chat as well, that Dayenu has set up that makes it really easy to call your senators. And we've provided a script as well. So all you have to do is plug in your address. And actually, why don't hold on. I can show you my screen. And for those who are interested, happy to stay on the line after the call. We found it's really fun to keep your video on and mute yourself and call at the same time. This is a good action today and every day. Really, again, we need to keep the drumbeat that this is an opportunity for ambitious climate action and the time to act is now. So while you're working on your letters, also consider making some phone calls. And so this is the website that I shared in the link. The script is right here. You just put your zip code. It will tell you who your senators are. You put in your contact information, click make a call, and it actually will call your phone. And at that point, it will lead you through the prompts. It will show you your script so you know what to say to these congressional offices. And again, call early, call often, leave a message, talk to a staffer. And for those who want to stick around, we can also make some calls together at the end of this call. So that is what I have to share. I know I've taken up a lot of time and it's a lot to consider, but I'm happy to answer questions in the chat, happy to stick around and answer questions afterwards as well.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead. Go right ahead.
Dahlia, thank you. That was super helpful and informative, and at least for me, like the exact right level of detail. I am curious about how long Dayenu's call scripts are and like the thinking behind that. I felt in most cases I am reaching answering machines. It's not a conversational thing, and they feel like actually painfully long to read. Can you give a little insight on the thinking behind that?
Sure. So I think we want to provide some level of detail. This isn't sort of a vote for this, don't vote for that. And so there is some nuance in at this particular time and what we're actually asking for. If people are reaching a person, that is a conversation that they can engage with. It doesn't have to be reading verbatim, but if you're leaving a voicemail, then we want to be sure that we're laying out the exact details. Later on in the process, it might be, do vote for this, don't vote for this. But I think that at this stage in the process, we actually do want to be weighing in. And this is where I think letters and lobby visits and other forms of communication are really helpful to provide additional nuance and context. But I think for this particular moment, the length of the script is what you'll see from partners and allies that we've been working with around the recovery and infrastructure plan.
Thank you.
Great. You know, I got kicked off my own call. That was a first. So I missed much of the second half, but I'm sure it was very informative. So do we have other questions here? Let's see. Elliot Rabin. How should we understand the relationship between this mammoth federal legislation and state climate legislation? For example, New York CCIA and CLCPA.
Sure. And I know it's a New York specific question, but I think is relevant to other states as well. So we need climate action at the federal, state, and local level. This idea of clean energy, jobs, and justice, and looking at the various dimensions of the climate crisis is something that doesn't begin and end at the federal level. And so the CCIA is another attempt at trying to bring this to New York State. And I know that one of the key partners on the economic recovery effort that we work with, their partner is New York Renews, who's leading the effort on the state level legislation. And so that has a lot to do with Dayenu's work around movement building and working in coalition with groups that are working at various levels, making sure that we're taking advantage of opportunities to pass legislation at the local, state, and federal level that's pushing for driving down fossil fuel emissions and massively increasing investment in clean energy and clean energy technology.
Great. Is there anyone else who has a question for Dahlia? Let's see. You can just unmute yourself if
I have
Judy
Yeah.
Berltheim from San Diego, outside San Diego.
I have a question, and it's not exactly about the jobs plan, but it's definitely about emissions and worldwide emissions. So I just learned in this past week about Bitcoin and the impact on emissions, and that's a worldwide problem. Does this plan have anything, or does Dayenu advocate for anything that will not only bring down our emissions, but force, encourage other countries to bring down their emissions? Thanks.
Sure.
And thank you for your overview of everything. It's all really interesting and super helpful.
Yeah. This is a really interesting week in terms of both the US commitment to reducing its emissions and global pledges. On Thursday and Friday, President Biden is going to be convening a global leaders summit, and he will, we expect, use that as an opportunity to announce the US's revised commitment to the Paris Agreement. And so how the Paris Agreement works is each country pledges a certain percentage of emissions reductions on a particular timescale. And the goal is to, the technical term is raise ambition, but easily understood, it's to continue to increase the percentage of those emissions reductions. And so a lot of advocates, Dayenu included, are calling for the Biden administration to come out with an ambitious pledge. And the way to achieve those emissions reductions is through efforts like this recovery package, the way to sort of curb our own emissions is to rapidly transition to clean energy. So piece one is to make the pledge. Piece two is to make sure that there's policy in place so that we can actually meet and hopefully exceed that commitment. And then there's a whole different piece around diplomacy in terms of encouraging other countries to curb their emissions. Rejoining the Paris Agreement was critical to showing US commitment to the global community that it's invested in climate leadership. But I do think there are some bad feelings. And so the US has a lot to prove as it wants to encourage global climate action. But the goal here is to try and get its partners and allies to admit to further emissions reductions, recognizing that the US and other countries that have the means to do so will likely have to support developing countries to meet some of their goals around the technology and investments that would be required in their own country. So it's a really big question. Hopefully that was a timely answer, but I think the answer is like, yes, it's great to see the Biden administration is really taking on everything all at the same time. And yet, in order for things to be binding, in order for them to stick around, we really do need legislation to sort of make those pledges and commitments and statements real.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. This was really exciting and informative. I'm sorry I missed some of it, but at least I can hear it on the recording. We want to invite all of you to stay. I'm going to close out the meeting, because we like to stick to our hour. But if you would like to stay on for the calls together as a group to our senators, that would be terrific. So I just wanted to end by saying we're in the midst of counting the Omer, the time period of 49 days of 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot, when we received the Torah together at Mount Sinai. This is the mystical theme for this week is Netzach, as I said at the beginning, which means endurance. And wow, do we need that now? The news is talking about people just hitting the wall. It's been so long, and climate work demands patience and persistence and hope as well. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So with every victory, there's just more to do. So I want to bless you all, tzaddikim, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, you righteous ones. I bless you in your work for this sacred goal to heal our planet home. May you pursue what is right in spite of the obstacles. May you celebrate your victories. May you and your family and friends be blessed with good health, safety, and security and strength to persevere in this very holy work. I made up a little song a familiar song today. And so I'll end with that. But stay on for calls afterwards. We will build this world with sun. Ya-da-dai, da-dai, da-dai, dai. Join me if you wish. We will build this world with wind. Da-da-dai, da-dai, ya-da-dai, dai. And we will build this world with hydro. Ya-da-dai, ya-dai, ya-da-dai, dai. Yes, and we will build this world with geothermal. Ya-da-dai, da-dai, ya-da-dai, dai. We will build this world with love. Ya-da-dai, ya-dai, ya-da-dai, dai. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. And thank you all for the wonderful work that you do. Keep on keeping on. And we will endure. We will persist. So stay on, and